Right now, as you're watching this, over 11 million people are living in darkness, and they don't know how many more days it will last. Cuba is facing the worst energy crisis in over 3 decades. The country has just 15 to 20 days of oil left. That's it. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if they ration everything. After that, nobody knows what happens. The electricity could vanish, the water could stop flowing, the entire society could collapse. This is the story of how one of the Caribbean's most vibrant nations ended up on the brink of catastrophe. And it all comes down to oil, politics, and a blockade that just changed everything. Let me explain what's actually happening on this island just 90 miles from Florida. Cuba has always been dependent on foreign oil. The country produces some oil domestically, but not nearly enough to sustain itself. For decades, they relied on 2 lifelines. First, Venezuela, their closest ally and their primary oil supplier. Second, Mexico, which provided additional crucial supplies. Together, these 2 countries kept the lights on, they kept the buses running, they kept people alive. But everything changed in January 2026. When the Trump administration took action against Venezuela's government, they did something unprecedented. They blocked Venezuelan oil from leaving the country. All of it. They captured oil tankers. They threatened tariffs on any nation that tried to help Cuba. Then, in a stunning display of pressure, they called on Mexico to stop selling oil to the Caribbean island. The result? Cuba, a country that needs roughly 37,000 barrels of oil per day to keep its infrastructure functioning, suddenly found itself cut off almost entirely. Here's the alarming part. According to data analysts at Kepler, Cuba started 2026 with approximately 460,000 barrels in storage. In January, they received one single shipment from Mexico, just 84,900 barrels. When you do the math, that's enough oil for approximately 15 to 20 days, maybe 3 weeks if they're extremely careful. Think about that for a moment. An entire nation of 11 million people, rationed to weeks of energy. The consequences aren't theoretical. They're happening right now. Blackouts have surged to 15 hours a day in major cities like Havana. The Antonio Guterres power plant, one of the largest thermal power stations, had to shut down. Schools are operating on reduced schedules. Hospitals are running on emergency protocols. Some facilities have had to ration surgery because they can't guarantee continuous electricity. Food distribution is collapsing. Without fuel, trucks can't deliver groceries. Farmers can't harvest crops. The average Cuban is already struggling to find one full meal a day. This crisis is making that worse. Airlines are suspending flights. Air Canada, the largest carrier to Cuba, has pulled out. Other airlines are struggling to maintain service because jet fuel is non-existent. Tourism, one of the few sources of hard currency for Cuba, is evaporating. The geopolitical situation is equally dramatic. Russia has expressed support for Cuba and suggested it might send oil as humanitarian aid, but there's a problem. Any shipment trying to reach Cuba would have to pass through the American blockade. It's unclear if that would even be allowed. China has also remained cautiously involved, but they are reluctant to escalate tensions with the United States over this crisis. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel has called for international intervention. The United Nations has warned of a humanitarian collapse. But none of that changes the basic reality. Cuba is facing its worst energy crisis since the revolution in 1959. Families are burning wood and charcoal for cooking. Public transportation is nearly non-existent. Small businesses are shutting down because they can't afford to operate without electricity. Some economists compare this to the special period of the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed and Cuba lost its subsidies. That crisis devastated the economy for an entire decade. This one could be worse because this time it's intentional, it's coordinated, and it has no clear timeline for resolution. The Trump administration has made clear that negotiations could happen, but the price? regime change, return of confiscated properties, fundamental political transformation. For Cuba's government, accepting those terms means surrendering power. For ordinary Cubans, it means suffering through what could be an extended period of darkness, hunger, and desperation. What makes this crisis even more tragic is that ordinary citizens are caught in the middle of a geopolitical chess game they didn't choose. Medical students are abandoning their studies. Young people are desperately trying to leave the country by any means necessary. Families are being separated as some members flee while others stay behind. The brain drain is accelerating. Cuba is losing its most talented doctors, engineers, and professionals to migration. Some estimates suggest that if this crisis continues for 6 more months, Cuba could lose an entire generation of its workforce. The long-term damage to the nation's infrastructure and economy could take decades to recover from, even if oil supplies are restored tomorrow. International observers are watching closely. This situation could set a precedent for how powerful nations use energy blockades as a political weapon. If successful, it could inspire similar tactics against other nations deemed hostile. But it also raises serious questions about humanitarian law and the rights of civilians caught in geopolitical conflicts. The world is watching, and the people of Cuba are running out of time. Every single day that passes brings Cuba closer to the moment when those oil reserves run dry, and nobody knows what happens after that. Will other nations risk American tariffs to send aid? Will Cuba's government collapse? Will thousands of desperate Cubans try to flee on makeshift boats? The answers to these questions will reshape the Caribbean, influence geopolitics, and determine the fate of millions of people who had no say in any of this. This is the story of a nation running out of time, and the clock is ticking.